Chapter 1. Echoes of the Past 5 Years. That's how long it had been since the world came crashing down around him. Ethan Parker gazed out over the ruined cityscape of Evergreen, his hands gripping the battered microphone as if it were a lifeline. The sprawling metropolis that had once teemed with life now lay in a state of eerie desolation, its towering skyscrapers crumbling, its streets choked with the debris of a civilization that had been torn apart by the ravages of the undead. Ethan sighed, his eyes drawn to the horizon, where the sun was slowly setting in a haze of ash and dust. It was time for his nightly broadcast, a ritual that had become a beacon of hope for the dwindling survivors scattered across this shattered landscape. With a steadying breath, he pressed the button, and his voice echoed out across the airwaves, reaching those who still clung to the promise of a future. This is Ethan Parker, broadcasting from the heart of Evergreen City. If you're out there, if you can hear me, then know that you're not alone. We're still fighting, still preserving the embers of humanity in this dark and unforgiving world. He paused, listening for any response, any glimmer of life amidst the silence. After a moment, a crackle of static reached his ears, and a familiar voice came through the speakers. "Ethan? Is that you?" Rachel's voice was tinged with relief, and Ethan felt a surge gratitude that she was still by his side, 5 years after the initial outbreak. "It's me, Rach. You holding up okay out there?" He kept his tone light, but the worry in his eyes betrayed his true emotions. "As well as can be expected," she replied, her voice steadying. "The perimeter's secure for now, but the damn zombies are getting bolder. We may need to relocate soon." Ethan nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Keep an eye on it. I'll be back as soon as I can." "You be careful out there, Ethan. I don't know what I'd do if—" Her voice trailed off, the unspoken fear hanging in the air between them. "I'll be fine. Just keep the lights on for me, okay?" Ethan forced a reassuring smile, even though she couldn't see it. "Always." The affection in Rachel's voice was palpable, and Ethan felt a momentary pang of guilt for the burdens he had placed upon her. With a deep breath, he turned his attention back to the microphone, his voice carrying a newfound resolve. "To anyone out there listening, know that there is still hope. We've endured these 5 long years, and we will endure for 5 more, if that's what it takes. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and keep fighting. This is Ethan Parker, signing off." He released the button, the airwaves falling silent once more. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the faded photos on the desk before him, a reminder of the life he had lost, and the reason he continued to fight. It had all started on that fateful night, 5 years ago, when the world as he knew it had come crashing down. Ethan closed his eyes, allowing the memories to wash over him, the images forever seared into his mind. He had been in the middle of his evening show, his voice echoing through the familiar confines of the radio studio, when the first reports had started coming in. At first, it had seemed like a typical emergency broadcast, warning of some kind of localized incident. But as the minutes ticked by, the situation had rapidly escalated, and Ethan had found himself at the center of a nightmare. Frantic calls had flooded the studio, panicked voices describing scenes of unimaginable horror, people transforming into savage, flesh-eating creatures, their eyes glazed over, their movements jerky and unnatural. Ethan had listened in stunned disbelief as the city descended into chaos, his producer Rachel desperately trying to maintain the broadcast, even as the cacophony of screams and shattering glass overwhelmed the airwaves. And then, the moment that would forever haunt his dreams. The studio doors had burst open, and a group of the infected had surged in, their rotting jaws snapping at the terrified staff. Ethan had watched in horror as his colleagues were torn apart, their anguished cries echoing in his ears. In the chaos, he had stumbled backward, fumbling for the emergency exit, his mind reeling with the realization that the world as he knew it was coming to an end. He had fled the studio, Rachel at his side, both of them running for their lives through the streets of Evergreen as the city descended into madness. The memories of that night were a blur, a chaotic jumble of images and sounds that Ethan had spent the past 5 years trying to reconcile. Now, as he sat in the relative safety of their makeshift headquarters, Ethan knew that the fight was far from over. The zombies, as they had come to be called, had evolved, their numbers swelling, their ferocity increasing with each passing year. Pockets of survivors had banded together, struggling to carve out a foothold in the devastated city, but the odds were stacked against them. Ethan's gaze drifted to the doorway, where a familiar figure stood, his expression hard and uncompromising. "Jackson," Ethan greeted, his voice tinged with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The former police officer had joined their group shortly after the initial outbreak, his skills as a tactician and fighter proving invaluable in the ongoing battle for survival. "Ethan." Jackson's response was curt, his eyes scanning the room with a practiced gaze. "We've got movement near the north perimeter. Looks like a new group of survivors, maybe a dozen or so." Ethan nodded, his mind already whirring with the implications. "Any sign of infection?" Jackson shook his head. "Not yet, but we can't be too careful. You want me to check it out?" Ethan considered for a moment, weighing the risks. On one hand, they could use the extra manpower, but on the other, the threat of the infected was ever present. "Proceed with caution. Take Delia with you and keep an open line. I don't want any surprises." "Got it." Jackson turned to leave, pausing for a moment in the doorway. "We're running low on supplies, Ethan. We're going to need to scavenge soon." Ethan let out a weary sigh. "I know. Just be careful out there." Jackson nodded, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Aren't I always?" As the ex-cop disappeared into the fading light, Ethan felt a familiar sense of dread settle in the pit of his stomach. The fight for survival was a never-ending battle, and he couldn't help but wonder how much longer they could hold out against the relentless onslaught of the undead. A soft knock at the door drew his attention, and he turned to see Rachel standing there, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. "Ethan, I just got a message. It might be important." Her voice was low, her eyes darting around the room as if she feared being overheard. Ethan straightened in his chair, his heart rate quickening. "What is it, Rach? Someone says they might have found a cure." Her words hung in the air, their implications rippling through Ethan's mind. A cure. The very thought of it was enough to rekindle the ember of hope that had been slowly fading within him. If they could find a way to reverse the effects of the zombie virus, then maybe, just maybe, they could reclaim the world they had lost. Ethan rose from his chair, his gaze fixed on Rachel's. "Where?" "An abandoned research facility, on the other side of the city. It's risky, Ethan, but—" Her voice trailed off, the unspoken question lingering between them. Ethan knew the risks all too well. The city was a treacherous maze, crawling with the infected, and the journey would be fraught with danger. But the possibility of a cure, of finally putting an end to this nightmare, was too tempting to ignore. With a resolute nod, Ethan made his decision. "Gather the team. We leave at first light." Rachel's eyes widened, but she didn't argue. She simply turned and hurried off, her steps quickening with a newfound sense of purpose. Ethan gazed out over the ruined cityscape once more, his mind racing with the implications of this latest revelation. If there was even the slightest chance of a cure, he knew they had to pursue it, no matter the cost. For the first time in 5 long years, a glimmer of hope flickered to life within him, a beacon in the darkness that had consumed their world. With a deep breath, Ethan returned to his desk, his fingers gripping the microphone as he prepared for the journey that lay ahead. "Hold on, Evergreen," he murmured, his voice resolute. "Help is on the way." Chapter 2. A Glimmer of Hope. The musty scent of decay hung thick in the air as Ethan Parker and his group made their way through the abandoned streets of Evergreen City. The once bustling suburban metropolis had been reduced to a crumbling zombie-infested wasteland, a shadow of its former self. Ethan led the way, his weathered face set in a determined expression. 5 years had passed since the initial outbreak, 5 years of struggling to survive in this blighted, post-apocalyptic world. Yet even in the face of such overwhelming adversity, he refused to let the embers of hope be extinguished. Beside him, Rachel kept a vigilant watch, her sharp eyes scanning the surrounding buildings for any signs of movement. The former radio producer had become an invaluable asset to the group, her technical expertise and unwavering loyalty proving essential in their constant battle for survival. The sound of their footsteps echoed along the deserted sidewalks, a stark reminder of the eerie silence that had replaced the once vibrant hum of the city. Ethan couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia for the life he'd known before the outbreak. The carefree days when he'd been a popular radio DJ, entertaining the masses with his quick wit and infectious energy. Those days were long gone, and now he was forced to fight for the survival of his makeshift family, a role he had never envisioned for himself. But Ethan's determination was unwavering. He would do whatever it took to protect his people and reclaim the world they had lost. As they rounded a corner, Ethan caught sight of a familiar figure in the distance. "Jackson," he called out, his voice carrying a hint of relief. The gruff ex-cop emerged from the shadows, his assault rifle cradled in his hands. "Ethan, Rachel," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "Find anything?" "Maybe," Ethan replied, quickening his pace. "We need to get to the lab. Dr. Chen said she's found something important." Jackson's brow furrowed, a hint of skepticism in his eyes. "Another lead, huh? What makes you think this one's any different?" Ethan understood Jackson's hesitation. Over the past 5 years, they had chased countless rumors and false promises, only to be disappointed time and again. But this time, something felt different. "I don't know," Ethan admitted, "but we have to at least check it out. This could be the break we've been waiting for." Jackson let out a resigned sigh, knowing better than to argue with Ethan's unwavering optimism. "All right, let's go. But we do this carefully, you hear me?" Ethan nodded, and the trio set off, their footsteps quickening as they headed towards the outskirts of the city, where Dr. Amelia Chen had taken refuge in a hidden laboratory. As they navigated the treacherous streets, Ethan couldn't help but reflect on the events that had led them to this point. It had been a long and harrowing journey, filled with loss, sacrifice, and the constant struggle to stay one step ahead of the ever-evolving zombie threat. The initial outbreak had been a shock to the system, a sudden and devastating event that had shattered the foundations of their civilized world. Ethan remembered the night of the deadly broadcast all too vividly, the moment when the familiar voices of his fellow radio personalities had been replaced by the eerie, animalistic growls of the infected. It had been a chilling harbinger of the horrors to come. In the days and weeks that followed, Evergreen City had descended into chaos. The streets were overrun with the undead, and the remaining survivors banded together in a desperate fight for survival. Ethan had lost his family during those initial frantic days, and the memory of their terrified faces still haunted him, fueling his determination to find a way to turn the tide. It was in the midst of that turmoil that Ethan had crossed paths with Rachel and Jackson, two kindred spirits who shared his unwavering resolve. Together, they had formed a small but formidable group, using their combined skills and resources to carve out a precarious existence in the ruins of the city. And now, 5 years later, they had stumbled upon a glimmer of hope, a potential cure that could finally put an end to the zombie apocalypse. Ethan couldn't help but feel a surge of cautious optimism as they approached the hidden laboratory, where Dr. Amelia Chen awaited their arrival. As they neared their destination, the group encountered a stark reminder of the dangers that lurked around every corner. A horde of zombies, their once human features now twisted and distorted, shambled towards them, their eyes vacant and hungry. "Get down," Jackson barked, raising his rifle and opening fire. Ethan and Rachel quickly took cover, their hearts pounding as they listened to the rapid crack of gunfire and the sickening sounds of the zombies being cut down. For a moment, Ethan feared that their mission would be cut short, that they would be overwhelmed by the relentless onslaught of the infected. But Jackson's expert marksmanship and the group's years of experience battling the undead gave them a crucial edge. After what felt like an eternity, the last zombie crumpled to the ground, and the eerie silence once again settled over the abandoned streets. Ethan emerged from his hiding spot, his eyes sweeping the area for any further signs of danger. "You all right?" Jackson asked, his gruff voice tinged with concern. Ethan nodded, his gaze meeting Rachel's. "Yeah, we're good. Let's keep moving. We can't afford to waste any more time." With renewed determination, the group pressed onward, navigating the treacherous terrain until they finally reached the hidden entrance to Dr. Chen's laboratory. Ethan took a deep breath, his hand gripping the weathered doorknob, as he prepared to confront the brilliant scientist who claimed to have found a solution to the zombie apocalypse. The door swung open, and Ethan stepped into the dimly lit space, his eyes quickly adjusting to the change in lighting. The laboratory was a stark contrast to the decay and destruction that had consumed the city outside. It was an oasis of order and scientific inquiry, a glimmer of hope in the midst of the darkness. "Dr. Chen?" Ethan called out, his voice echoing through the cavernous room. A movement in the corner caught his eye, and Ethan turned to see a petite, bespectacled woman emerge from behind a cluttered workbench. Her face was pale and drawn, but her eyes gleamed with a determined intensity that belied her fragile appearance. "Ethan," she said, her voice measured and calm, "I'm glad you're here. We have much to discuss." Ethan gestured to Rachel and Jackson, who flanked him, their weapons at the ready. "What is it you've discovered, Doctor? Something that can help us put an end to this nightmare?" Dr. Chen nodded, her gaze sweeping over the group. "Indeed, I believe I have. But before I share the details, I must warn you. What I've uncovered comes with great risk, both for us and for the future of humanity." Ethan felt a surge of trepidation, but he refused to let his hope be diminished. "Whatever it is, we're willing to take that risk. We've come too far to turn back now." Dr. Chen's lips pressed into a thin line, and she beckoned them closer. "Very well. Follow me, and I'll show you what I've been working on." As the group followed the scientist deeper into the laboratory, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. Could this truly be the breakthrough they had been searching for? The key to reclaiming their world from the clutches of the undead? The weight of that possibility hung heavily in the air, fueling their determination to see this through, no matter the cost. They were about to embark on a journey unlike any they had faced before, one that would test the limits of their resolve and challenge their very conceptions of what it meant to survive in this post-apocalyptic landscape. But with Dr. Chen's discovery as their guiding light, Ethan and his group were prepared to take on whatever obstacles stood in their path, driven by the unwavering belief that they could and would triumph over the zombie menace. Chapter 2, at approximately 2,000 words, is complete. Chapter 3, Into the Abyss. The group gathered around the makeshift table in their decrepit safe house, the flickering light casting shadows across their solemn faces. Ethan surveyed the assembled members, his brow furrowed with a mix of determination and trepidation. "All right, everyone, we all know what's at stake here," he began, his voice steady but tinged with a hint of uncertainty. "Dr. Chen has found a possible cure, but we need to get the equipment she needs to develop it. That means going back into the city, deep into the heart of the zombie-infested chaos." Rachel, Ethan's closest ally, spoke up, her expression resolute. "We don't have a choice. This is our best chance at turning the tide and taking back our world, but it's going to be incredibly dangerous." Jackson, the grizzled ex-cop, leaned forward, his scarred features etched with a pragmatic edge. "That's why we need a solid plan. We can't just rush in blindly and hope for the best. We need to know exactly what we're up against." Ethan nodded, grateful for Jackson's tactical expertise. "That's where Delia comes in." He gestured to the scruffy, weathered woman who had been guiding them through the treacherous city streets. Delia cleared her throat, her piercing gaze sweeping across the group. "I've been scouting the area. There's an underground network of tunnels and service corridors that could get us close to the research facility where the equipment is located. It's the fastest and safest route, but it's no cakewalk." She unrolled a tattered map, her calloused fingers tracing the intricate web of passages. "The tunnels are crawling with the evolved zombies. They've adapted to the darkness and confined spaces, and we're not the only ones who know about this route." Tension rippled through the group as they leaned in, studying the map and the daunting obstacles it revealed. "So what's the plan?" Ethan asked, his voice betraying a hint of trepidation. Delia's eyes narrowed. "We move fast, stay quiet, and be prepared for anything. I'll lead the way, but everyone needs to be on high alert. Once we reach the facility, we'll have to move quickly to secure the equipment and get out of there." Dr. Amelia Chen, the brilliant young scientist, spoke up, her brow creased with concern. "What about the zombies? How do we ensure the equipment remains undamaged? Delia's lips thinned into a grim line. We'll have to fight our way through. The zombies are faster and stronger, but we'll need to take them down without damaging the crucial components. Ethan surveyed the group, his gaze lingering on each member. Are we ready for this? Rachel placed a reassuring hand on his arm. We have to be. For the sake of everyone still out there, we have to try. Jackson stood, a determined glint in his eyes. Then let's get moving. The sooner we get that equipment, the sooner we can start turning the tide against these damn zombies. The group nodded in agreement, the weight of their mission pressing down on their shoulders as they gathered their weapons and supplies, preparing to venture once more into the heart of the devastated city. The descent into the underground tunnels was a nerve-wracking affair, the group's footsteps echoing ominously in the dank, dimly lit passage. Delia led the way, her keen eyes scanning for any signs of the evolved zombies that were rumored to prowl the confined spaces. Ethan gripped his weapon tightly, his heart pounding in his ears as they navigated the twisting corridors. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the group couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that they were being watched. Stay close and keep quiet, Delia whispered, her voice barely audible. The zombies have adapted to the darkness. They'll be able to sense any movement or sound. The group moved cautiously, their footsteps muffled as they followed Delia's lead. Occasionally, they would catch a glimpse of movement in the shadows, sending a chill down their spines, but Delia's expert guidance kept them on track. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a massive rusting metal door. Delia paused, her hand on the handle, and turned to the group. This is it. On the other side is the research facility where the equipment is located, but we're not the only ones who know about this place. She fixed them with a stern gaze. Stay alert and ready for anything. Taking a deep breath, Delia pulled the door open, and the group stepped into the dimly lit facility, their senses on high alert. The facility was a maze of cluttered hallways and abandoned labs, the air thick with the stench of decay. Ethan felt a sense of unease as they navigated the eerily silent corridors, their footsteps echoing against the crumbling walls. Suddenly, a loud crashing sound echoed from a nearby room, followed by the unmistakable snarls of the evolved zombies. Delia immediately raised her weapon, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the area. "We've got company," she growled, motioning for the others to take cover. The group scrambled to find suitable hiding spots, their hearts pounding as the sounds of the approaching zombies grew closer. Ethan crouched behind a toppled laboratory table, his grip on his weapon tightening as he prayed they wouldn't be discovered. The snarls grew louder, and Ethan could hear the sound of clawed feet scuttling across the floor. He risked a glance around the table, his eyes widening at the sight of the evolved zombies. They were unlike anything he had seen before, their bodies contorted and elongated, with razor-sharp claws and glowing red eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness. Their movements were lightning fast, and Ethan knew they would be no match for the group's standard weapons. "Shit!" he whispered, his heart racing. "We need to get out of here, fast." Delia's voice suddenly cut through the tension. "Everyone on my mark, we make a break for the equipment room. Stay low and move quickly. Don't engage the zombies unless absolutely necessary." The group tensed, their muscles coiled like springs as they waited for Delia's signal. Then, with a nod, she darted out from her hiding spot, the others close on her heels. The group sprinted down the corridor, their footsteps pounding against the cracked tile. Ethan could hear the snarls and screeches of the zombies as they gave chase, their clawed hands swiping at the air behind them. Turning a sharp corner, Delia led them to a heavy metal door, quickly punching in a code on the keypad. The door slid open, and the group rushed inside, slamming it shut behind them. They found themselves in a large, cluttered laboratory, shelves and tables lining the walls, filled with various scientific equipment and supplies. "This is it," Delia announced, her breathing heavy. "We need to find the components Dr. Chen needs and get out of here as fast as possible." The group immediately began searching the room, their hands trembling with adrenaline as they sorted through the scattered items. Ethan caught sight of Rachel, her brow furrowed in concentration as she methodically cataloged the equipment. Suddenly, A loud bang echoed from the door, followed by the snarls of the zombies. Ethan whirled around, his weapon raised, as the door began to buckle under the weight of the creatures. "They're breaking through," Jackson yelled, taking up a defensive position. The group braced themselves, their weapons at the ready, as the door finally gave way and the zombies spilled into the room. The ensuing battle was a chaotic blur of snarls, gunfire, and the sound of shattering glass. Ethan fought with a desperate intensity, his weapon blazing as he tried to keep the zombies at bay. Rachel and Dr. Chen worked tirelessly to gather the necessary equipment, their movements frantic but precise. Jackson and Delia, with their years of experience, moved with a fluid, deadly grace, their weapons cutting down the zombies that drew too close. But even their skill couldn't hold the horde at bay forever. As the group fought to keep the zombies at a distance, Ethan caught a glimpse of a figure lurking in the shadows. His eyes narrowed as he recognized the familiar features of Marcus, the former gang member who had joined their group. "Marcus!" Ethan yelled, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "What the hell are you doing?" Marcus emerged from the shadows, a twisted grin on his face. "I'm doing what I have to, Ethan. This cure is too valuable to just hand over to you." Ethan's blood ran cold as he realized the truth. Marcus was working against them, seeking to exploit the cure for his own gain. "You bastard!" Ethan growled, his weapon swinging towards Marcus. But before he could fire, Marcus vanished back into the shadows, his laughter echoing through the room. Gritting his teeth, Ethan refocused his attention on the zombies, his heart pounding with a mix of fear, anger, and determination. They had to hold out long enough to secure the equipment and escape this nightmare. As the battle raged on, Ethan caught a glimpse of Rachel and Dr. Chen, their faces streaked with sweat and grime, but their hands steady as they carefully packed the precious equipment. "We've got it!" Rachel shouted, her voice strained. "Let's get out of here." Ethan nodded, his gaze sweeping the room. "Jackson, Delia, cover us. We need to move now." The group formed a tight formation with Ethan, Rachel, and Dr. Chen in the center, surrounded by Jackson and Delia, their weapons blazing as they fought their way towards the exit. The zombies were relentless, their clawed hands swiping and snapping at the group, but the team's coordination and determination kept them moving forward. Finally, they reached the door, Delia slamming it shut behind them as they fled into the darkness of the tunnels, the echoes of the zombies' snarls fading in the distance. Ethan's lungs burned as they ran, his heart pounding in his ears, but he refused to slow down. They had the equipment they needed, but the betrayal of Marcus still weighed heavily on his mind. As the group emerged into the fading daylight of the city, Ethan knew that their ordeal was far from over. The race against time had only just begun, and they had to get the cure back to their base before the zombies, or their own treacherous allies, caught up to them. With a renewed sense of purpose, Ethan led his weary but determined team back towards their temporary refuge, the weight of the world on their shoulders, and the fate of humanity hanging in the balance. Chapter 4: Betrayal in the Ranks. The cramped confines of the old warehouse echoed with the clatter of equipment and the muffled sounds of discussion as Ethan's group returned from their perilous mission. Weary but triumphant, they had managed to secure the crucial components needed for Dr. Amelia Chen to finalize her potential cure for the zombie virus. Ethan strode into the makeshift command center, his gaze sweeping over the assembled team. "Good work, everyone. We're one step closer to finding a way to end this nightmare." Rachel, Ethan's former producer and closest ally, stepped forward, her expression guarded. "I'll start setting up the equipment so Amelia can get started, but we need to talk about what happens next." Ethan nodded, sensing the underlying tension in her voice. "Agreed. We'll need to plan our next move carefully. With the broadcast tower still under enemy control, we have a long way to go before we can distribute the cure." As the group gathered around the makeshift table, a new figure emerged from the shadows. Marcus, a former gang member who had joined their ranks in the aftermath of a previous encounter. "I might have an idea about that," Marcus said, his tone casual, but his eyes scanning the room with a hint of calculation. "I've been hearing some rumors about a fortified outpost that could give us access to the tower." Jackson, the gruff ex-cop, eyed Marcus with open suspicion. And why should we trust your rumors? You've been keeping a lot of information to yourself since you joined up. Marcus shrugged, unfazed by the scrutiny. Look, I'm just trying to help. You need a way to get to that tower, and I know the city better than any of you. Let me at least check it out, see if it's a viable option. Ethan considered the proposal, weighing the risks and potential benefits. All right, Marcus, take Delia with you and see what you can find. But be careful out there. As Marcus and Delia departed, the remaining group members turned their attention to the more immediate task at hand, preparing for Dr. Chen's work on the cure. Rachel busied herself with the delicate equipment, her brow furrowed in concentration. Amelia, what do you need from us to get this thing off the ground? The young scientist, her eyes bright with determination, began ticking off a list. I'll need a secure, controlled environment to work in, and constant access to power. The equipment is sensitive and can't afford any disruptions. Jackson crossed his arms, his gaze sweeping the cavernous warehouse. We can fortify one of the inner rooms, make it secure. As for power, we'll have to scavenge for a generator and hope it holds out. Ethan nodded, already in motion. I'll get the others on it. We need to move fast. Every hour could make a difference. As the group dispersed to their assigned tasks, Rachel pulled Ethan aside, her voice lowered. Something's not right with Marcus. I don't trust him, and I don't think we should be sending him off on his own. Ethan sighed, the weight of leadership weighing heavily on his shoulders. I know, but we need to take the risk. We can't afford to pass up any potential leads, not when we're this close. Rachel's jaw tightened, but she nodded reluctantly. All right, but I want Jackson to shadow them, just in case. I've got a bad feeling about this. Ethan squeezed her shoulder, offering a reassuring smile. We'll keep an eye on him. Now, let's get to work. The sooner we get this cure ready, the sooner we can take the fight to those bastards at the tower. The next several hours were a flurry of activity as the group transformed one of the inner rooms into a makeshift laboratory. Delia and Marcus returned with a promising report about the fortified outpost, sparking renewed hope and urgency. As Dr. Chen began her meticulous work, the tension within the group began to mount. Ethan could sense the underlying unease, the subtle shifts in body language, and the occasional, furtive glances exchanged between the team members. Late one night, as Ethan made his rounds, he stumbled upon a heated discussion between Rachel and Jackson, their voices hushed, but their body language tense. I'm telling you, there's something off about Marcus. I don't like the way he's been acting, and I don't trust him to be out there on his own, Rachel hissed. Jackson nodded, his brow furrowed. I agree. I've had my eye on him, and I don't like what I've seen. He's been disappearing for long stretches, and he's been awfully evasive when I ask him about it. Ethan cleared his throat, causing the pair to whirl around in surprise. What's going on here? Rachel's gaze darted nervously between Ethan and Jackson. We're just concerned about Marcus. His behavior is raising some red flags, and we think he might be up to something. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, I've noticed it too. But we need him, at least for now. If he's our best chance of getting to that tower, we have to take the risk. Jackson's expression darkened. But what if he's working with the enemy? What if he's leading us into a trap? Ethan held up a hand, his voice firm. I understand your concerns, but we can't afford to lose focus right now. Amelia is making progress on the cure, and we need to keep our eyes on the prize. We'll keep a close watch on Marcus, but for now, we have to trust that he'll come through for us. Rachel and Jackson exchanged a long, weighted look, but they both reluctantly nodded in agreement. All right, Ethan, but the first sign of trouble, and I'm putting a bullet in his head, Jackson growled. Ethan clasped the ex-cop's shoulder, his expression somber. I'll keep that in mind. Now, let's get back to work. We're running out of time. As the days passed, the tension within the group continued to simmer, fueled by the growing unease surrounding Marcus. Ethan tried to maintain a sense of focus and unity, but the cracks were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. One evening, as the group gathered for a status update, Marcus strode in, his expression unusually jubilant. Good news, everyone. I think I've found a way to get us to that broadcast tower, he announced, a hint of a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Ethan raised a hand, silencing the murmurs of excitement. That's great, Marcus, but we need to know more. What exactly did you find? Marcus plopped down on a crate, leaning forward with a conspiratorial air. Well, it turns out there's a rival group that's been eyeing that tower too. They've got it pretty well fortified, but I think I can get us in through a back entrance. Rachel stepped forward, her eyes narrowed. And how exactly did you come by this information? Marcus shrugged, his expression nonchalant. I've been making some discreet inquiries, talking to the right people. You know how it is in this city. Everyone's got an angle, and they're willing to share for the right price. Jackson's hand inched towards his holster, his gaze unrelenting. So you've been making deals with our enemies? Putting us all at risk? Marcus raised his hands in a placating gesture. Whoa, easy there, big guy. I'm just trying to help us get to that tower, just like the rest of you. You want to take down those bastards and broadcast the cure, don't you? Ethan held up a hand, silencing the building tension. All right, Marcus, let's hear your plan. But I want full transparency, and I want Jackson and Rachel to be involved every step of the way. Marcus scoffed, his eyes narrowing. You don't trust me, do you? After all I've done to help this group? Ethan's expression hardened. Trust has to be earned, Marcus, and right now, you're doing a pretty poor job of it. Marcus opened his mouth to retort, but Dr. Chen's arrival cut him off. Ethan, I've finished the initial batch of the cure. It's ready for testing, she announced, her voice tinged with both excitement and trepidation. The room fell silent, the weight of the moment palpable. Ethan turned to the group, his gaze sweeping over their faces. All right, everyone, let's get to work. We've got a tower to take and a world to save. As the group sprang into action, Rachel pulled Ethan aside, her expression troubled. I don't trust him, Ethan. I think we're making a mistake by letting Marcus lead us to that tower. Ethan sighed, his own doubts weighing heavily on him. I know, Rachel, but we're running out of options, and we need to get to that tower if we're going to have any chance of distributing the cure. We'll keep a close eye on him, and the moment he steps out of line, we'll shut him down. Rachel nodded reluctantly, her lips pressed into a thin line. All right, Ethan, but if he betrays us, I won't hesitate to put him down. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I know. We'll get through this, Rachel. We have to. With a deep breath, Ethan rejoined the group, his mind racing as they prepared to embark on their most perilous mission yet. Chapter 5. The Longest Night. The narrow streets of Evergreen City were enveloped in an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional howl of the wind sweeping through the abandoned buildings. Ethan Parker gripped the rifle tightly, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. They had managed to reach the relative safety of the lab, but he knew their respite would be fleeting. How long until the cure is ready, Amelia? Ethan asked, his voice tinged with urgency. Dr. Amelia Chen looked up from her workstation, her brow furrowed with concentration. I'm making good progress, but it's going to take some time. We're still missing a few critical components. Ethan nodded, his jaw set with determination. Then we need to move fast. Those things are going to be on us soon, and we can't afford to be caught with our pants down. Rachel stepped forward, her expression grave. Ethan's right. Marcus's betrayal has put us in a dangerous position. We need to secure this place and prepare for a fight. Jackson, the gruff ex-cop, stepped up beside Rachel. I'll take a team and do a sweep of the perimeter. We need to fortify the entrances and set up a proper defense. Ethan met Jackson's gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. Do it. I'll stay here and help Amelia. We can't afford to lose this chance. As the team dispersed to carry out their tasks, Ethan turned to Rachel, his eyes searching her face. How are you holding up? Rachel let out a shaky breath. Honestly, I'm scared, Ethan. We've been through so much, and now we're on the verge of something that could change everything. I just hope we can pull this off. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We will. We've come too far to give up now. This is our chance to take back our world. His expression hardened with resolve. We're not going to let it slip through our fingers. Darkness had fallen by the time the group had finished their preparations. The lab's reinforced doors were barricaded, and a network of tripwires and alarms had been set up to warn of any approaching threats. Jackson's team had swept the surrounding buildings, clearing out any stray zombies and establishing strategic vantage points. Ethan stood at the window, his gaze fixed on the ruined cityscape. "Amelia, how much longer?" "Another hour, maybe less," the scientist replied, her voice tense. "I'm almost finished, but there are a few final adjustments that need to be made." "We may not have that kind of time," Ethan muttered, his eyes narrowing as he spotted movement in the distance. Suddenly, a deafening roar echoed through the streets, followed by the sound of shattering glass and splintering wood. Ethan whirled around, his heart pounding. "They're here!" Rachel's voice rang out, her fingers flying over the communications console. "I'm reading a massive horde converging on our location." Ethan rushed to the window, his breath catching in his throat. A sea of twisted, decaying figures surged forward, their eyes glowing with a primal hunger. The evolved zombies, with their eerily enhanced speed and strength, swarmed the building, battering the doors and windows. "Jackson, get your team into position," Ethan barked. "We're about to have company." The ex-cop's voice crackled over the radio. "Copy that. We're ready. Just say the word." Amelia emerged from the lab, her face pale but determined. "The cure is ready. We need to get it to the broadcast tower as soon as possible." Ethan's gaze darted between the doctor and the relentless horde outside. "We'll have to fight our way through. Rachel, get the vehicle ready. We're going to make a run for it." Rachel nodded, her expression grim. "I'll need a few minutes to get the engine running. Can you and the others hold them off until then?" Ethan gripped his rifle, his knuckles white. "We don't have a choice. Jackson, open fire on my mark." As the thunderous barrage of gunfire echoed through the streets, Ethan's group engaged the zombie horde in a desperate battle for survival. The creatures, undeterred by the rain of bullets, surged forward, slamming against the fragile barricades with terrifying force. Delia, the resourceful scavenger, unleashed a barrage of Molotov cocktails, creating a wall of flames that momentarily stemmed the tide. Marcus, with his street-savvy instincts, darted between the zombies, delivering precise shots to their vulnerable heads. Despite their best efforts, the sheer number of the infected overwhelmed the group's defenses. One by one, the zombies breached the perimeter, their gaping jaws snapping at the survivors. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest as he watched his team fight for their lives, their weapons blazing in the darkness. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed through the building, followed by the agonized screams of Delia. Ethan whirled around to see her trapped beneath a fallen beam, her leg pinned and her face twisted in agony. "Delia!" Rachel cried, her eyes wide with horror. She made a move to rush to the woman's aid, but Ethan grabbed her arm, his grip unyielding. "No, Rachel, we can't afford to get bogged down. We have to get the cure to the tower, no matter what." His voice was laced with anguish, but his expression was resolute. Rachel stared at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "But we can't just leave her." Ethan's jaw tightened, his heart breaking at the realization of what he was about to do. "I'm sorry, Delia. We have to go." With a nod to Jackson, he turned and sprinted towards the waiting vehicle, Rachel trailing close behind. The sound of Delia's agonized screams followed them as they peeled out onto the street, the cure secured in the back of the truck. Ethan gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, as he weaved through the zombie-infested streets, his mind reeling with the weight of the decision he had just made. Rachel huddled in the passenger seat, her face buried in her hands, her body shaking with silent sobs. Ethan reached over and squeezed her shoulder, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We're going to make it, Rachel. We have to." The journey to the broadcast tower was a harrowing one, with the vehicle dodging fallen debris and the relentless horde of zombies. Ethan's skills as a driver were put to the test, as he navigated the treacherous terrain with a combination of precision and sheer determination. As they neared their destination, a new challenge emerged. The tower itself was heavily fortified, surrounded by a formidable wall and several armed guards. Ethan gritted his teeth, his mind racing to formulate a plan. "We need to get past that checkpoint," he said, his voice low. "Any ideas?" Rachel wiped the tears from her eyes, her expression hardening with resolve. "I might have a way, but it's risky." Ethan turned to her, his gaze unwavering. "I'm listening." Rachel outlined her plan, and Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. It was a dangerous gambit, but they had no other choice. With a nod, he steered the vehicle towards the checkpoint, his heart pounding in his ears. As they approached the tower, the guards raised their weapons, their voices echoing through the deserted streets. Ethan held up his hands in a gesture of surrender, his expression calm and collected. "We come in peace," he called out, his voice projecting a confidence that belied the turmoil within. "We have a cure for the virus. We need to get it to the broadcast tower." The guards exchanged wary glances, their fingers hovering over the triggers of their weapons. Ethan held his breath, praying that Rachel's gambit would pay off. After a tense moment, one of the guards stepped forward, his brow furrowed with skepticism. "A cure, you say? Prove it." Ethan nodded, his expression grave. "We have the formula and the necessary equipment. All we need is access to your tower's broadcast systems." The guard eyed them warily, then turned to confer with his companions. Ethan and Rachel waited, their nerves on edge as the group deliberated. Suddenly, a thunderous explosion rocked the ground, and the sound of screaming filled the air. Ethan whirled around, his heart sinking as he saw a horde of zombies surging towards them, their numbers swelling with each passing moment. "We don't have time for this," he shouted, his voice laced with desperation. "Let us in, or we're all dead." The guards hesitated for a heartbeat, then one of them barked an order, and the massive gates began to swing open. Ethan gunned the engine, and the vehicle lurched forward, careening through the gap as the zombies closed in. Once inside the tower's compound, Ethan brought the vehicle to a screeching halt, his eyes scanning the area for a way to secure the cure. Rachel was already out of the car, her expression grim. "We need to get to the top of the tower, fast," she said, her voice urgent. "I'll coordinate with the guards to set up a perimeter. You and the others need to get that cure broadcast." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. "Amelia, Jackson, with me. We're running out of time." The trio dashed towards the tower's entrance, their weapons at the ready. As they pushed through the doors, they were met with a chaotic scene. Guards and survivors engaged in a desperate battle against the invading horde. Ethan gritted his teeth, his heart pounding in his chest. "Stay close and keep your eyes peeled. We need to get to the top no matter what." The ascent to the tower's transmission equipment was a harrowing one, with the group fighting off zombies at every turn. Amelia, her lab coat stained with grime, clutched the cure tightly, her expression a mixture of determination and fear. Finally, they reached the top, the city's ruined skyline stretching out before them. Ethan turned to Amelia, his gaze unwavering. "This is it, Amelia. Give me the cure and let's get it broadcast." Amelia hesitated, her eyes searching Ethan's face. I'm not sure if this will work. What if it doesn't?" Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression grim but resolute. "We have to try. For all of us. For humanity." Amelia swallowed hard, then nodded, handing over the vial of precious liquid. Ethan gripped it tightly, his heart pounding in his ears as he turned towards the broadcast equipment. "This is it," he murmured, a glimmer of hope in his voice. "The beginning of the end of this nightmare." Chapter 6. Road to Redemption. The rubble-strewn streets of Evergreen City offered little respite as Ethan's group trudged onward, their footsteps echoing hollowly against the crumbling facades of once bustling buildings. The weight of their recent losses hung heavy, a palpable shadow that clouded their thoughts and dulled their senses. Ethan led the way, his gaze hardened with grim determination. Behind him, Rachel kept her eyes peeled for any signs of danger, her fingers twitching reflexively towards the handgun holstered at her side. Jackson brought up the rear, his weathered face etched with a mix of vigilance and wariness. As they navigated the treacherous landscape, the group's encounter with the zombies at their former base played out in their minds, a vivid memory that refused to fade. The sound of shattering glass, the stench of decaying flesh, and the frantic screams had seared themselves into their psyche, a testament to the relentless, evolving threat they faced. Ethan's jaw tightened as he recalled the loss of their safe haven, the place they had called home for so long, now reduced to a smoldering ruin. It was a bitter reminder of the fragility of their existence and the constant need to adapt and survive in this hostile world. "We need to find another place to regroup," Ethan said, his voice low but firm. "Somewhere we can hunker down and figure out our next move." Rachel nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. "There's got to be some kind of fortified structure or abandoned building we can use. Somewhere with supplies and defensible positions." Jackson grunted in agreement, his gaze sweeping the surrounding area with practiced vigilance. The suburbs might be our best bet. Less dense population, more potential hiding spots. As the group pressed forward, their footsteps crunching on the debris-strewn pavement, a sudden movement caught their eye. Instinctively, they tensed, weapons at the ready, until a small figure emerged from the shadows, a young girl, her eyes wide with fear. "Please help me," she cried, her voice trembling. "The zombies, they're everywhere." Ethan rushed forward, his protective instincts kicking in. "It's okay, you're safe with us," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "What's your name?" "Lily," the girl replied, her small frame shaking. I don't know what happened to my family. I was alone, and then the zombies." Rachel moved to Lily's side, wrapping a comforting arm around the girl's shoulders. "It's all right, Lily. We'll keep you safe. Can you tell us what happened?" Lily's story emerged in halting, tear-filled fragments of a quiet suburban neighborhood overrun by the relentless zombie horde, of parents who had sent her running to escape the carnage. She had been wandering the streets for days, terrified and alone, until she had stumbled upon Ethan's group. As the girl's words sank in, the members of the group exchanged somber glances, their hearts heavy with the weight of Lily's trauma and the shared experiences of loss that now bound them together. "You're coming with us, Lily," Ethan said, his voice laced with a quiet determination. "We'll find a safe place for you, and we'll do everything we can to help you." Lily's eyes widened with gratitude, and she nodded shakily, the first tentative glimmers of hope shining through the fear that had consumed her. With Lily now among them, the group pressed onward, their pace quickened by a renewed sense of purpose. The suburbs, with their vast, open spaces and the possibility of untapped resources, beckoned as a potential refuge, a chance to regroup, to recuperate, and to chart a new course in this unforgiving world. As they navigated the decimated streets, the group encountered the grim remnants of the city's former life, abandoned vehicles, shattered windows, and the occasional corpse, a stark reminder of the price paid for survival. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a pungent aroma that never seemed to fade, no matter how far they traveled. Delia, the group's resourceful guide, led them through the maze of obstructions, her keen eyes scanning the surroundings for any potential threats. Her own experiences had hardened her, and she moved with a feline grace, her steps sure and silent. "This way," she murmured, gesturing towards a side street. "I know a place that might work, an old strip mall with some fortified storefronts. Might still have supplies, and it's out of the way of the main zombie routes." Ethan nodded, his trust in Delia's instincts growing with each passing day. "Lead the way," he said, his gaze sweeping the group to ensure they were all accounted for. As they traversed the labyrinth of crumbling streets, the group encountered pockets of resistance, small bands of survivors who eyed them with suspicion and hostility. Ethan, ever the diplomat, tried to reason with them, offering the promise of safety and shared resources. But more often than not, the encounters ended in tense standoffs, a testament to the scarcity of trust in this new, broken world. Finally, they reached the outskirts of the suburban sprawl, the towering silhouettes of abandoned commercial buildings rising before them. Delia guided them to a specific entrance, her movements precise and unhesitating. "This is it," she said, her voice lowered to a whisper. "It's not much, but it should offer some protection, at least until we can figure out our next move." Ethan surveyed the structure, his eyes scanning for any signs of activity or potential threats. "Okay, let's do a quick sweep and see if it's secure. Jackson, you take the lead. Rachel, stay with Lily and make sure she's safe." As the group moved cautiously into the building, their senses heightened. Ethan couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. This place, for all its flaws, could provide the respite they so desperately needed, a chance to regroup, to plan their next steps, and to find the courage to continue their fight against the relentless zombie horde. The interior of the strip mall was a stark contrast to the devastation outside. The floors were remarkably intact, and the storefronts, while dusty and abandoned, offered the promise of untapped resources. Jackson moved methodically, his weapon at the ready, as he cleared each room, his years of law enforcement experience guiding his every action. After a thorough sweep, the group convened in what appeared to be a former electronics store, its shelves still lined with various gadgets and equipment. Rachel's eyes lit up, and she immediately set to work, her nimble fingers assessing the state of the tech. "Some of this stuff is still salvageable," she said, her voice tinged with a newfound sense of purpose. "If we can get the power back on, we might be able to jury-rig a communication system, maybe even boost the range of our radio broadcasts." Ethan felt a surge of relief at Rachel's words. The prospect of regaining their foothold in the communication network was a vital step towards reclaiming some semblance of control in this chaotic world. "That's exactly what we need," he said, his gaze shifting to Lily, who sat huddled in a corner, her eyes darting nervously. "In the meantime, we need to get this place secured and make sure Lily feels safe." As the group set to work, their movements imbued with a newfound sense of purpose, Ethan couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. The weight of their losses still hung heavy, a constant reminder of the sacrifices they had made to reach this point. But in Lily's eyes, he saw a glimmer of hope, a beacon that urged him and his companions to press on, to fight for a future worth reclaiming. The hours ticked by as the group fortified their new shelter, barricading the entrances, scavenging for supplies, and making the necessary repairs to create a semblance of safety. Lily, once withdrawn and fearful, gradually emerged from her shell, her curiosity piqued by the group's efforts. "Do you think we'll be safe here?" she asked Ethan, her voice small but tinged with a thread of optimism. Ethan's gaze softened as he looked at the young girl, her resilience in the face of such overwhelming adversity both humbling and inspiring. "I don't know for certain," he admitted, "but we're going to do everything we can to protect you, Lily. This place may not be perfect, but it's the best chance we have right now to regroup and figure out our next move." Lily nodded, her eyes shining with a glimmer of trust. "Okay, I believe you." As the group settled in for the night, Ethan took a moment to survey their makeshift sanctuary. The dim glow of the lanterns cast a warm, if muted light over the space, and the sound of Rachel's tinkering with the electronics provided a steady, comforting backdrop. In the quiet moments that followed, Ethan found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point, the triumphs and the tragedies, the bonds forged in the crucible of adversity. And as he considered the uncertain future that lay ahead, he felt a renewed determination to see this fight through, no matter the cost. For in the face of such overwhelming darkness, the glimmer of hope embodied by Lily's resilience had become a beacon, a reminder that the human spirit could not be extinguished, even in the most dire of circumstances. With a deep breath, Ethan turned his gaze towards the horizon, his resolve hardened by the knowledge that the road to redemption lay before them, fraught with peril but ultimately within reach. Chapter 7. Waves of Hope. The air was thick with tension as Ethan's group gathered around the makeshift table in their temporary safe house. After the harrowing events of the past few days, they had managed to find refuge in an abandoned hotel on the outskirts of the city, but the respite was short-lived. They had a crucial mission ahead of them, one that could determine the fate of humanity. Ethan surveyed the faces of his companions, Rachel, Jackson, Delia, and the newest addition, the young survivor Lily. Each bore the marks of their ordeal, their eyes haunted by the horrors they had witnessed. But there was also a renewed sense of determination, a glimmer of hope that had been reignited by Dr. Amelia Chen's groundbreaking discovery. "All right, everyone," Ethan began, his voice steady despite the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "We all know what's at stake here. Dr. Chen has finally completed the cure, and now we need to figure out how to distribute it across the city and beyond." Rachel leaned forward, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The key is going to be the broadcast tower. If we can gain control of that facility and use its transmission capabilities, we might be able to broadcast the cure far and wide." "But the tower is heavily fortified," Jackson interjected, his gruff voice cutting through the silence. "We'll need to plan this mission meticulously if we're going to have any chance of success." Ethan nodded, his gaze sweeping across the group. "That's why I've decided to reach out to another group that might be able to help us." The others exchanged curious glances, and Ethan continued. "A few days ago, we received a transmission from a settlement on the outskirts of the city. They claim to have a well-equipped militia and a strategic location near the broadcast tower. I think it's worth reaching out to them and seeing if we can forge an alliance." Rachel's eyes widened. "An alliance? Ethan, you know how risky that could be. We've already had one traitor in our midst. How can we trust these strangers?" Ethan raised a hand, silencing her concerns. "I hear you, Rachel, but we don't have much choice. Our resources are dwindling, and we need all the help we can get if we're going to pull this off. Besides, they might have intel or equipment that could prove invaluable." Jackson leaned back in his chair, his steel-gray eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Ethan's right. We can't afford to go into this alone. If these people are serious about working with us, it could give us a fighting chance." Delia, who had remained silent up until this point, finally spoke up. "I know a couple of the folks in that settlement. They're tough, but they're not heartless. If we can convince them that we're all in this together, they might just be willing to lend a hand." Lily, who had been listening intently, piped up, her voice small but determined. "I think we should at least try. If there's a chance we can save everyone, we have to take it, right?" Ethan smiled at the young girl, his heart swelling with a newfound sense of hope. "That's right, Lily. We have to try." He turned to the rest of the group. "So who's with me?" One by one, the others nodded their agreement, their expressions resolute. This was their last chance, their final push to reclaim their world from the clutches of the zombie apocalypse. The next day, Ethan, Rachel, Jackson, and Delia set out to make contact with the settlement near the broadcast tower. The journey was tense, with the ever-present threat of the evolved zombies lurking in the shadows. They moved cautiously, their weapons at the ready, their senses on high alert. As they approached the outskirts of the city, they spotted the distinctive silhouettes of armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Delia raised a hand, signaling the others to halt. "This is as far as I can take you. The rest is up to you." Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the fortified compound in the distance. "Thanks, Delia. We'll be in touch as soon as we can." The group advanced slowly, their hands raised in a gesture of peace. A voice crackled over a loudspeaker, demanding they identify themselves. Ethan took a deep breath and spoke clearly. "My name is Ethan Parker. We have a proposition for your leader. We come in peace, and we need your help." After a tense moment of silence, the gates began to swing open, and a contingent of heavily armed men and women emerged. At their head was a tall, imposing figure, a woman with a commanding presence and a no-nonsense expression. "I'm Sophia, the leader of this settlement," she announced, her gaze sweeping over the newcomers. "You claim you need our help. What makes you think we should trust you?" Ethan stepped forward, choosing his words carefully. "We have a potential cure for the zombie virus, and we need to get it broadcast across the city, but we can't do it alone. Your settlement is strategically positioned near the broadcast tower, and we believe that by working together, we can reclaim that facility and save what's left of humanity." Sophia's eyes narrowed, and for a long moment she remained silent, considering Ethan's proposal. Finally, she spoke, her voice betraying a hint of skepticism. "A cure, you say? If what you're telling me is true, then you've got my attention, but I'll need to see proof before I agree to anything." Ethan glanced back at Rachel, who nodded and stepped forward, presenting a small vial containing the cure. "This is it, the result of Dr. Amelia Chen's research. We can show you how it works, but we'll need your cooperation to make it a reality." Sophia took the vial, her gaze thoughtful. "All right, I'll give you a chance. But know this, if you try to double-cross us, it'll be the last thing you ever do. Understood?" Ethan met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "Understood. We're in this together." Back at the safe house, the group eagerly awaited news of the negotiations. Lily sat huddled in the corner, her knees drawn up to her chest, while Dr. Amelia Chen paced the room, her brow furrowed with worry. "Do you really think they'll agree to work with us?" the young scientist asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I have to believe they will, Amelia. We don't have any other choice. This is our last chance to end this nightmare and reclaim our world." Just then, the sound of approaching footsteps drew their attention, and Ethan, Rachel, and Jackson stepped back through the door, their expressions cautiously optimistic. "Well, Dr. Chen asked, her eyes searching their faces for any sign of good news. Rachel broke into a rare smile. "They're in. Sophia and her people have agreed to help us take back the broadcast tower and distribute the cure." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, and Lily's face lit up with a hopeful expression. "Does that mean we're going to win?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. Ethan knelt down beside her, his eyes filled with a renewed determination. "Yes, Lily, I truly believe we're going to win this thing, but it's not going to be easy. We've got a lot of work to do to prepare for the final push." Jackson stepped forward, his gruff demeanor softening slightly. "Ethan's right. We need to make sure we have everything we need. Supplies, weapons, a solid plan of attack. This is our one shot, and we can't afford to screw it up." The group quickly set to work, pooling their resources and expertise to devise a comprehensive strategy. Delia and Marcus, the former gang member who had since proven his loyalty, were tasked with scouting the area around the broadcast tower, gathering intel on the enemy's defenses. Meanwhile, Rachel and Dr. Chen fine-tuned the delivery system for the cure, ensuring it could be transmitted effectively through the tower's broadcast equipment. Ethan and Jackson coordinated with Sophia's settlement, finalizing the logistics of the joint operation. As the days passed, a sense of cautious optimism began to take hold. The group could feel the tide turning, the weight of their struggle slowly but surely shifting in their favor. For the first time in years, they dared to dream of a future beyond the nightmare of the zombie apocalypse. The day of the mission finally arrived, and the combined forces of Ethan's group and Sophia's settlement set out toward the fortified broadcast tower. Ethan stood at the head of the column, his eyes fixed on the distant spire, his heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and determination. "This is it, everyone," he said, his voice carrying a newfound sense of authority. "Whatever happens, we fight for the future of humanity. No matter the cost, we have to succeed." The group responded with a chorus of affirmative murmurs, their resolve hardening as they drew closer to their objective. The stage was set for the final confrontation, a last desperate gambit to reclaim their world and restore the hope that had been snuffed out years ago. As they neared the tower, the first signs of the enemy's defenses became visible. A well-fortified perimeter, armed guards, and the ominous presence of zombies lurching within the compound. Ethan's grip tightened on his weapon, his mind racing with the implications of the mission ahead. This was it, the moment of truth. The fate of the world hung in the balance, and Ethan knew that failure was not an option. With a deep breath, he channeled his inner strength and led his companions forward, prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 8: The Ascent. The fortified broadcast tower loomed before them, its steel and concrete structure rising defiantly against the bleak horizon. Ethan gazed up at the imposing structure, feeling a mixture of trepidation and determination. This was the final leg of their journey, the culmination of their desperate quest to reclaim their world. "There it is," Ethan said, his voice tinged with a weary resignation. "The key to distributing the cure and ending this nightmare." Rachel stood beside him, her eyes scanning the tower's perimeter with a critical eye. "It's heavily fortified, but that means it's our best chance. If we can get to the top and transmit the cure, we might actually pull this off." Jackson joined them, his expression grim and resolute. "We'll need to be careful. This place is a fortress, and I'm sure there are plenty of defenses we haven't accounted for." Ethan nodded, his grip tightening on the rifle slung across his chest. "Delia, what can you tell us about the layout and security measures?" The weathered scavenger stepped forward, her eyes narrowed as she studied the tower. "Based on my intel, the main entrance is heavily guarded and reinforced. We'll need to find an alternate route to the top. There's an emergency stairwell on the north side that might give us a chance, but it'll be treacherous." "That's our best shot then," Ethan said, his jaw set with determination. "We need to move fast before the zombies catch wind of what we're up to. Everyone, gear up and prepare for the worst. We're going to the top of that tower, no matter what stands in our way." The group quickly gathered their supplies and weapons, securing extra ammunition and medical kits. Ethan could feel the tension and apprehension in the air, but there was also a sense of purpose and resolve that fueled their movements. They were so close to the finish line, but the final obstacle loomed before them, a towering challenge that would test their skills and their determination to the limit. As the group approached the northern side of the tower, Ethan's eyes narrowed, scanning the area for any signs of activity. The streets were eerily quiet, save for the distant growls and shuffling of the undead. Delia held up a hand, signaling them to take cover behind a crumbling wall. "There," she whispered, pointing to a heavily reinforced door, partially obscured by rubble. "That's the entrance to the emergency stairwell, but I can see at least a dozen armed guards patrolling the perimeter." Ethan cursed under his breath, his mind racing to formulate a plan. "We can't take them all on head-on. We need a distraction, something to draw their attention away from the entrance." Rachel spoke up, her eyes gleaming with a spark of inspiration. "What if we use the radio to lure them away? Ethan, you could broadcast a message, something to make them think there's trouble elsewhere in the city." Ethan considered the idea, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It's risky, but it just might work. All right, let's do it. Rachel, get set up and be ready to transmit on my signal. The rest of us will prepare to make a run for that door the moment the guards are distracted." As the group took their positions, Ethan took a deep breath, centering himself before stepping up to the makeshift radio equipment. He could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders, but the resolve in his heart burned brighter than ever. With a steady hand, he flipped the switch, the familiar crackle of the broadcast filling the air. "This is Ethan Parker, calling out to any and all survivors still listening. We've discovered a potential cure for the zombie virus, and we need your help to distribute it. But first, we have to secure the broadcast tower in the heart of the city. I'm transmitting this message as a warning. The tower is under attack by a massive horde of zombies. All available survivors, please converge on the tower immediately to help defend it. Time is running out, and the fate of humanity hangs in the balance. I repeat, the tower is under siege, and we need your assistance. Please, if you can hear me, come to the tower as soon as possible." Ethan's voice echoed through the deserted streets, his words carrying a sense of urgency and desperation. Rachel monitored the broadcast, her fingers poised to cut the transmission the moment the guards were lured away. Sure enough, within minutes, Ethan could see the guards reacting to the message, their weapons at the ready as they hurried across the street, disappearing around the corner. "Now, Rachel!" he shouted, and the group burst into action, sprinting towards the reinforced door. Jackson took the lead, his powerful frame slamming into the door and sending it crashing open. The group piled in, Rachel sealing the entrance behind them as they found themselves in a dimly lit concrete stairwell. The sound of their heavy footsteps echoed up the spiral stairs, the only indication of the daunting climb that awaited them. Ethan paused for a moment, taking in the sight of the towering structure before them. "All right, everyone. Stay focused and stay together. We've come too far to fail now. Let's move out." The group began their ascent, their footsteps echoing against the unyielding concrete walls. Delia took the lead, her keen eyes scanning for any signs of danger as they climbed higher and higher. The air grew thinner, and the temperature dropped, but the group pressed on, driven by a shared determination to reach the top. As they neared the halfway point, a sudden rumble shook the stairwell, and the group halted, bracing themselves against the walls. Ethan's heart raced as he heard the unmistakable sound of the building's defenses activating, a series of heavy, armored doors slamming shut, sealing off the stairwell at various intervals. "They've locked us in," Jackson growled, his eyes narrowing as he inspected the nearest door. "We're going to have to find a way to bypass these security measures." Amelia stepped forward, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Give me a moment. I might be able to override the system and open these doors." The group watched in tense silence as Amelia worked, her nimble fingers flying across the exposed control panel. After several nerve-wracking minutes, there was a faint hiss, and the nearest door slid open, revealing the next section of the stairwell. "Hurry before it closes again," Amelia shouted, gesturing for the others to move. The group surged forward, their pace quickening as they raced against the closing doors. Delia took the lead, her keen senses guiding them through the maze of security checkpoints. Ethan could feel the strain in his muscles, the burn in his lungs, but he pushed on, determined to reach the top. As they neared the final set of doors, a sudden impact shook the stairwell, and Ethan nearly lost his footing. He whirled around, his eyes widening as he caught sight of the source of the disturbance. A massive, hulking figure that had smashed through one of the lower doors, its glowing red eyes and gnashing teeth, a clear sign of the evolved zombie threat. "Everybody, brace yourselves!" Ethan yelled, raising his rifle and opening fire. The rest of the group quickly followed suit, their weapons unleashing a barrage of bullets at the advancing abomination. The zombie roared in pain, its monstrous form undeterred by the hail of gunfire. It charged forward, its massive fists slamming against the walls and sending chunks of concrete raining down. Ethan gritted his teeth, emptying his magazine as he tried to slow the creature's relentless assault. "We can't hold it off much longer," Jackson shouted, his voice strained with exertion. "Amelia, you and the others need to keep moving. Delia and I will hold it back." Amelia hesitated, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "No, I won't leave you behind. We're in this together." Ethan stepped forward, placing a hand on Amelia's shoulder. "She's right, Jackson. We can't afford to lose anyone else. We'll make a stand here, together." With renewed determination, the group braced themselves, their weapons trained on the advancing zombie. Ethan could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, his heart pounding in his ears as he prepared for the inevitable clash. The behemoth reached the group, its towering form looming over them like a harbinger of doom. Ethan took a deep breath, his finger tightening on the trigger as he unleashed a barrage of bullets into the creature's chest. The others followed suit, their combined firepower rocking the zombie back, but it refused to fall. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light erupted from the creature's maw, and Ethan barely had time to react as a searing beam of energy sliced through the air, narrowly missing him. The group scattered, dodging the deadly attack as the zombie let out a deafening roar. "It's mutating again," Delia shouted, her eyes wide with horror. "We need to hit it with everything we've got." Ethan knew they were running out of time. The zombie's regenerative abilities and evolving powers were too much for their limited ammunition. They had to find a way to bring it down, and fast. Gritting his teeth, Ethan charged forward, his rifle blazing. The others joined him, their weapons unleashing a hail of bullets and grenades at the creature. The stairwell echoed with the deafening sounds of the battle, and Ethan could feel the ground trembling beneath his feet. Just as the zombie seemed poised to overwhelm them, a blinding flash of light erupted from the upper levels of the tower, a shockwave rippling through the air. The zombie froze, its glowing eyes dimming as it let out a gut-wrenching howl. Ethan watched in stunned silence as the creature began to convulse, its mutated flesh disintegrating before their eyes. "The cure," Amelia breathed, her voice laced with a mixture of awe and relief. "It's working." Ethan felt a surge of hope as he witnessed the zombie's rapid regression, its monstrous form crumbling into a lifeless heap. The group stood in stunned silence, their weapons still raised in anticipation of another attack. But the creature remained motionless, its threat finally neutralized. Ethan turned to his comrades, a weary smile spreading across his face. "Let's finish this. The top of that tower is waiting." With renewed vigor, the group pressed on, their steps quickened by the triumph of their victory. The final stretch of the stairwell was a blur, their focus now centered on reaching the transmission equipment and broadcasting the cure to the world. As they burst through the final set of doors, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The top of the tower was a veritable fortress, its walls reinforced with a maze of scaffolding and defensive measures. But amidst the chaos, he could see a group of survivors working frantically at a central control console, their expressions a mixture of determination and fear. Ethan raised his hand, his voice echoing across the open space. "We're here to help. Get that cure transmitted, and we'll hold off any threats." The survivors turned, their faces lighting up with renewed hope. Ethan could see the weight of the world lifting from their shoulders as they resumed their frantic work, their fingers flying across the console. Ethan turned to his group, his gaze sweeping over each of their faces. "This is it, everyone. Time to take back what's ours. Let's show these bastards what we're made of." With a roar of defiance, the group charged into the fray, their weapons blazing as they prepared to face whatever stood in their way. The final battle for the fate of humanity had begun. Chapter 9: Signal of Salvation. The final push to the top of the broadcast tower was grueling, with the group navigating a precarious maze of crumbling stairs, collapsing scaffolding, and the ever-present threat of the zombie horde below. Ethan led the way, his face etched with a mix of determination and fear, knowing that their last chance at salvation rested on reaching the transmission equipment at the tower's summit. Rachel followed close behind, her eyes scanning their surroundings for any sign of danger. Jackson brought up the rear, his assault rifle at the ready to lay down cover fire at a moment's notice. Delia and Lily moved with a sense of desperate urgency, their faces set in grim resolve. As they climbed higher, the air grew thick with the stench of decay, and the snarling cries of the zombies echoed up from the streets below. Ethan could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the weight of their mission pressing heavily on his shoulders. "We're almost there," he called out, his voice hoarse but resolute. "Just a little further, everyone. Stay close, and keep your eyes peeled." Reaching a small landing, the group paused to catch their breath, their eyes fixed on the final stretch of stairs leading up to the top of the tower. Delia moved to the edge, peering down at the swarm of zombies below. "This is it," she said, her voice laced with trepidation. "The endgame. You sure you're ready for this, Ethan?" Ethan took a deep, steadying breath, his gaze unwavering. "We have to be. There's no turning back now." He turned to the others, his expression hardening. "Everyone, listen up. This is where it all comes down. We can't afford any mistakes. Stick together, watch each other's backs, and don't stop until we reach the top. Understood?" The group nodded, their faces set with a mixture of fear and determination. Ethan knew that the next few moments would test them to their limits, but they had come too far to fail now. "All right, let's move out," he said, leading the way up the final stretch of stairs. As they ascended, the group encountered pockets of resistance from the undead, their claws and teeth snapping at the survivors. Jackson and Delia took point, their weapons blazing as they carved a path through the horde. Ethan, Rachel, and the others followed close behind, their hearts pounding with each step. At last, they reached the top of the tower, the transmission equipment within their grasp. But as they burst through the door, they were met with an unexpected sight: a well-organized group of survivors, armed and ready to defend their position. "Hold it right there," a gruff voice called out. "This tower is ours. You're not taking another step." Ethan raised his hands, trying to defuse the tense situation. "We don't want any trouble. We just need to use your equipment to broadcast a cure for the zombie virus. It could save what's left of humanity." The leader of the rival group, a burly man with a scarred face, narrowed his eyes. "A cure, huh? That sounds like something we could use to our advantage. Hand it over, and maybe we'll let you live." Dr. Amelia Chen stepped forward, her expression resolute. "I can't do that. The cure is the only hope we have left. We have to distribute it to as many people as possible." The man let out a harsh laugh. "That's not how this works, sweetheart. You either give us the cure or we take it by force. And trust me, you don't want to see what we'll do to get it." Ethan felt a surge of anger, his fists clenching at his sides. "You're not getting your hands on that cure. It belongs to everyone, not just your group." The leader's eyes narrowed, and he raised his weapon. "So be it. You've made your choice." In the tense moments that followed, the air was thick with the sound of gunfire and the growls of the approaching zombie horde. Ethan and his group took cover, returning fire with whatever weapons they had. Rachel desperately tried to reach the transmission equipment, her fingers flying across the controls. Jackson and Delia fought side by side, their movements fluid and coordinated as they took down the rival group's soldiers one by one. Lily, her eyes wide with fear, huddled behind a fallen piece of debris, praying for a miracle. The battle raged on, and Ethan knew that they were running out of time. They had come too far to fail now. The fate of humanity rested on their shoulders. With a renewed sense of purpose, he surged forward, his weapon blazing, determined to reach the transmission equipment at all costs. As Ethan and the others fought their way towards the control panel, a familiar voice suddenly pierced the chaos. "Ethan, I've got it! Get ready to broadcast the cure." It was Dr. Amelia Chen, her face flushed with triumph. Ethan felt a surge of hope as he nodded, positioning himself in front of the microphone. "This is Ethan Parker, broadcasting to all survivors in the Evergreen region," he said, his voice strong and clear. "We have a cure for the zombie virus. Repeat, we have a cure. If you can hear this, make your way to the city's central broadcast tower. We are transmitting the cure now." As Ethan spoke, Rachel and Dr. Chen worked feverishly to set up the transmission, their fingers flying across the controls. The rival group's soldiers redoubled their efforts, desperate to stop the broadcast, but Ethan and his allies fought with a renewed determination. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the room, and a deafening hum echoed through the air. The cure was being transmitted, its waves of energy pulsing outward, reaching every corner of the devastated city. Ethan watched in awe as the zombies below began to slow, their movements becoming erratic and disjointed. One by one, they collapsed to the ground, their bodies convulsing as the cure took effect. The rival group's soldiers, sensing the tide turning, began to retreat, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Ethan and his group cheered, their voices mingling with the sound of the cure's transmission. But the moment of triumph was short-lived, as a new threat emerged from the stairwell. A hulking, mutated creature that towered over the others, its eyes glowing with a sinister intelligence. "What the hell is that thing?" Jackson yelled, his weapon at the ready. Ethan's eyes widened as he recognized the figure. It was Marcus, the former gang member who had betrayed them. But Marcus had been transformed, his body warped and twisted by the zombie virus, now a monstrous hybrid that seemed to possess a horrifying level of sentience. "The cure," Marcus growled, his voice distorted and inhuman. "I won't let you take it from me." The creature lunged forward, its massive claws slashing through the air. Ethan and his group scattered, desperately trying to evade the creature's attacks. Jackson and Delia opened fire, their bullets peppering the mutant's hide, but it seemed to have no effect. Rachel and Dr. Chen continued to work the controls, their faces etched with a mixture of determination and fear. Lily, despite her terror, helped to defend the transmission equipment, her small but nimble frame allowing her to dart in and out of the creature's reach. Ethan knew that they were running out of time. The cure had to be transmitted, no matter the cost. With a roar of defiance, he charged forward, his weapon aimed at the creature's head. "This is for my family," he cried, unleashing a barrage of gunfire. The mutant howled in pain, its attention momentarily diverted. Seizing the opportunity, Rachel and Dr. Chen redoubled their efforts, the transmission reaching a deafening crescendo. "It's working," Dr. Chen shouted, her eyes shining with triumph. "The cure is spreading." Ethan felt a surge of hope, but it was short-lived as the mutant creature turned its attention back to him, its eyes burning with a murderous rage. Ethan braced himself, knowing that he might not survive the encounter. But as the creature lunged forward, a blur of movement caught Ethan's eye. Lily, her small frame darting between the creature's legs, had managed to plant a grenade at the base of its spine. With a desperate cry, she scrambled to safety, and the grenade exploded in a burst of fire and shrapnel. The mutant howled in agony, its massive form crumbling to the ground. Ethan and the others watched in stunned silence as the creature's body convulsed, the zombie virus within it finally succumbing to the power of the cure. As the transmission reached its final crescendo, Ethan and his group watched in awe as the zombies below began to collapse, their bodies twitching and jerking as the cure swept through the city. The streets, once teeming with the undead, now lay empty, the only sound the eerie silence that followed the end of the apocalypse. Ethan let out a shaky breath, his eyes reflecting the weight of all they had endured. He turned to his group, a mixture of pride and relief etched on his face. "We did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We actually did it." The group erupted in cheers and tearful embraces, the realization of their triumph slowly sinking in. Lily rushed to Ethan, her small arms wrapping around him in a tight hug. Ethan held her close, a bittersweet smile spreading across his face. As the group began to make their way down the tower, Ethan paused, his gaze sweeping across the ruined city. In the distance, he could see the first signs of life, survivors emerging from their hiding places, their faces filled with a mixture of disbelief and hope. Ethan knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, but for the first time in 5 years, he felt a glimmer of optimism. The cure had been broadcast, and now it was up to the survivors to come together and rebuild what had been lost. With a renewed sense of purpose, Ethan led his group down the tower, their steps lighter and their hearts filled with the promise of a better future. Chapter 10: Dawn of a New Day. The scarred streets of Evergreen City were still shrouded in an eerie silence, as if the world itself held its breath in anticipation. Ethan Parker stood atop the fortified broadcast tower, gazing out at the horizon, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and lingering sorrow. The final battle had been a brutal, chaotic affair, but in the end, the cure had been successfully transmitted, its effects rippling out across the city. Ethan could see the first signs of change. The shuffling, mindless hordes were slowing, their movements becoming less erratic. The once relentless zombies were regressing, their ravenous hunger slowly fading. Ethan let out a shaky breath, the weight of the past 5 years finally lifting from his shoulders. They had done it. Against all odds, his group had found the cure and reclaimed their world. Yet the victory had come at a heavy price. Turning, Ethan made his way back down the tower, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous interior. As he descended, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The early days after the initial outbreak had been a blur of fear and desperation, as Ethan and his small group of survivors struggled to stay alive amidst the chaos. Losing his family had been the most devastating blow, fueling his determination to find a way to reverse the zombie plague and restore a sense of normalcy to the world. Ethan's radio broadcasts had become a lifeline for the scattered remnants of humanity, offering hope and guidance in the face of overwhelming darkness. It was during one of those broadcasts that he had first heard the message about a potential cure, setting in motion the events that would test the group's resolve and forge unbreakable bonds between them. Reaching the base of the tower, Ethan stepped out into the open, his eyes searching the rubble-strewn streets. The group had gathered there, weary but triumphant, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and lingering sorrow. Rachel approached him, her usually sharp features softened by a tentative smile. "It's over, Ethan. We did it." She paused, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "But at what cost?" Ethan placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, understanding the unspoken grief that weighed heavily on all of them. "They didn't die in vain, Rachel. Their sacrifice, and the sacrifices of so many others, made this victory possible. We owe it to them to keep fighting, to rebuild what we've lost." Jackson, his weathered face set in a rare expression of contemplation, joined them. "We still have a long way to go, but at least now we have a real chance to reclaim our world." Dr. Amelia Chen, her lab coat tattered and stained, approached the group, her eyes shining with a mixture of triumph and uncertainty. "The cure is taking effect, but the full extent of its reach is still unknown. We'll need to monitor the situation closely and plan for the challenges ahead." Ethan nodded, his mind already turning to the task of organizing the survivors and coordinating the rebuilding efforts. "Then that's what we'll do. We've come this far, and we're not about to give up now. Evergreen is ours to reclaim." As the group shared a moment of quiet solidarity, a small figure emerged from the shadows. Lily, the young survivor they had rescued during their desperate journey. Her face, once etched with fear and uncertainty, now held a glimmer of hope. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is the cure working? Can we really go home?" Ethan knelt down, placing a reassuring hand on the girl's shoulder. "Yes, Lily. The cure is being broadcast across the city as we speak. The zombies are reverting, and soon we'll be able to start rebuilding. To go home." Tears of joy welled in Lily's eyes, and she threw her arms around Ethan, burying her face in his chest. The simple gesture was a powerful reminder of the hope they had fought to preserve, the future they had reclaimed. In the days that followed, the effects of the cure became increasingly apparent. The zombie horde, once an unstoppable force, began to slow and lose their cohesion. Ethan's radio broadcasts, now reaching a growing number of survivors, became a rallying call, urging the scattered remnants of humanity to come together and reclaim their city. Delia, the resourceful scavenger, leveraged her knowledge of the city's layout to guide search and rescue teams, retrieving survivors from their hiding places and bringing them to the makeshift camps established around the broadcast tower. Slowly but surely, the streets of Evergreen began to come alive again, as people emerged from the shadows, their eyes filled with a newfound determination. Marcus, the former gang member, had initially been wary of the group's intentions, but the success of the cure and the promise of a better future had changed his outlook. He joined the effort to secure the city, using his street smarts and connections to gather supplies and establish secure routes for the growing number of survivors. As the weeks passed, Ethan's group found themselves at the center of the reclamation effort, their leadership and expertise proving invaluable. Ethan's voice, once a beacon of hope, now carried an added weight of responsibility as he rallied the people of Evergreen to rebuild their lives. In the midst of the rebuilding, Ethan and his group took time to mourn those they had lost. The sacrifices of their fallen comrades were not forgotten, their names etched into the walls of a makeshift memorial erected at the base of the broadcast tower. Rachel, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, laid a single white flower at the memorial, a silent tribute to the friends and loved ones they had been forced to leave behind. Ethan placed a comforting arm around her, understanding the depth of her grief and the bittersweet nature of their victory. Jackson, his gruff exterior softened by the weight of their experiences, stood guard over the memorial, his expression one of solemn reverence. The former cop, once consumed by his own demons, had found a renewed sense of purpose in the rebuilding effort, his tactical expertise and unwavering determination proving invaluable. Dr. Amelia Chen, her laboratory now bustling with a team of scientists and researchers, continued to study the effects of the cure, determined to ensure its long-term efficacy and uncover any potential side effects. Her work was not just a professional pursuit, but a personal crusade to undo the devastation that had been wrought upon the world. As the city slowly came back to life, Ethan knew that their journey was far from over. The road ahead would be arduous, filled with challenges and setbacks, but the glimmer of hope in the eyes of the survivors was all the motivation he needed to press on. Standing at the top of the broadcast tower, Ethan took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone, his voice carrying a sense of conviction and purpose that had been forged in the crucible of their struggle. People of Evergreen, this is Ethan Parker. The nightmare is over. The cure has been transmitted, and the zombies are regressing. Now is the time to come together to rebuild our lives and our city. It will not be easy, but I know that with the strength of our community, we can reclaim what was lost and forge a better future. His words echoed across the city, stirring the hearts of the survivors who had gathered to hear his message. Ethan could see the spark of hope ignite in their eyes, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. We have faced the darkest of times, but we have emerged stronger, more determined than ever to fight for our right to live. Today we take the first step towards a new dawn, a new era for Evergreen and for all of humanity. Let us work together, support one another, and build a world where we can live, not just survive. As Ethan's broadcast concluded, the crowd below erupted in cheers and applause, their voices carrying a sense of renewed vigor and optimism. The group, battered but unbroken, stood together, united in their determination to rebuild and reclaim their city, their world. In the distance, the first rays of the sun peeked over the horizon, bathing the scarred landscape in a warm golden glow. It was a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the light would always find a way to break through. Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with a bittersweet sense of pride and relief. The journey had been arduous, the sacrifices immeasurable, but in the end, they had succeeded. Evergreen and the world beyond had a chance to heal and to thrive once more. As the group set out to begin the monumental task of rebuilding, Ethan knew that the path ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but he also knew that they were ready. Together they would face whatever the future held, united in their shared purpose and the knowledge that they had emerged from the darkness, stronger and more resilient than ever before. This was not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where the human spirit would shine brighter than the shadows that had threatened to consume them. Evergreen would rise again, and Ethan would be there to guide his people towards a future filled with hope and the promise of a better world.